Forced 3 times in one night, the Vatican's darkest secret hidden for 500 years. When people think of the Vatican, they imagine holiness, silence, and divine authority. A place untouched by the chaos of the outside world. A place where truth is preserved, protected, and passed down through centuries. But what if that image isn't the full story? For over 500 years, whispers have echoed through the walls of this ancient institution. Whispers of power, control, hidden archives, and secrets that were never meant to be seen by the public eye. Not rumors born on the internet, not modern conspiracy theories, but stories rooted in real history, in real events, buried beneath layers of silence. Because the truth is, the Vatican is not just a religious center. It is one of the oldest and most powerful institutions on earth, and with that kind of power comes the ability to hide things. Deep inside the Vatican lies a place most people will never see. The Vatican's secret archives, now officially called the Apostolic Archive. Miles of documents, letters, records, some dating back over 1,000 years. Locked away, protected, and in many cases, never released to the public. What's inside those archives? Historians have only scratched the surface. Some documents reveal political alliances that shaped entire nations. Others hint at internal conflicts, suppressed knowledge, and decisions that changed the course of history forever. And then there are the documents that remain classified. Why keep them hidden? That's the question that has haunted researchers, historians, and investigators for generations. Throughout history, the Vatican has faced moments of crisis, times when its authority was challenged, when scandals threatened its image, when truth and power stood face to face. And in many of those moments, the response was not transparency, but silence. Take the time of the Renaissance, for example. A period of art, beauty, and intellectual awakening, but also a time when corruption within the Church reached levels that shocked even its own followers. Powerful families rose to control the papacy. Wealth, influence, and politics became deeply intertwined with religion. Some leaders of the Church lived lives that directly contradicted the values they preached. And yet, much of this was hidden from the public, controlled through strict authority and limited access to information. Then came the era of reform. Voices began to rise, questioning the actions of the Church, demanding change, demanding truth. But challenging an institution like the Vatican was never simple. Those who spoke out often faced consequences, social, political, even personal. And still, the full truth remained out of reach. Over the centuries, there have been countless claims of documents being altered, removed, or locked away. Stories of individuals who tried to uncover hidden truths, only to disappear from the narrative entirely. Whether these claims are fully accurate or partially exaggerated, one thing is clear: the Vatican has always been extremely careful about what the world is allowed to see. Even in modern times, controversy continues. Reports of internal misconduct, financial secrecy, and institutional protection have surfaced again and again. Investigations have been launched. Statements have been made. But for many people, the answers never feel complete. It raises a deeper question. How much of history do we really know? And how much of it has been shaped by those in power? Because when an institution survives for over 1,000 years, it doesn't just witness history, it helps control it. It decides what is recorded, what is preserved, and sometimes, what is forgotten. And that's what makes the story of the Vatican so fascinating. Not just because of what we know, but because of what we don't. Imagine standing in front of a locked door. Behind it, shelves filled with documents that could change the way we understand history, religion, and power itself. But the key to that door is held by only a few. Would you open it? Or would you leave it closed, trusting that whatever is hidden there is meant to stay hidden? For centuries, that door has remained mostly closed. And maybe that's the real secret. Not a single shocking event. Not one hidden scandal. But an entire system built on controlling information. A system where truth is carefully managed, where access is limited, and where silence can be more powerful than any words ever spoken. Because sometimes, the most powerful secrets are not the ones that are told, but the ones that are never allowed to be heard. And the deeper you go into the history of the Vatican, the more complex the story becomes. Because this isn't just about hidden documents or ancient archives. It's about influence, global influence that has shaped kings, empires, and entire civilizations. There was a time when a single decision made within those walls could determine the fate of a nation. Monarchs feared excommunication. Leaders sought approval. Entire wars were influenced by the Church's position. Think about that for a moment. An institution that didn't just guide spiritual life, but controlled political destiny. And when that level of authority exists, transparency becomes dangerous. During different periods in history, there have been accounts of internal power struggles, conflicts not visible to the outside world. Different factions within the Church competing for influence, control, and direction. Not all of these conflicts were public. In fact, many were handled quietly, behind closed doors. Some historians believe that certain decisions made during these internal struggles changed the course of religious doctrine itself. That what people came to believe as absolute truth may have been shaped, influenced, or even altered over time. Not necessarily through lies, but through selective storytelling. Choosing what to include. Choosing what to leave out. And over centuries, those choices add up. Then there are the moments when information almost came to light. Leaked letters. Discovered manuscripts. Testimonies that surfaced briefly before disappearing again into obscurity. Each one offering a small glimpse into something bigger, something just out of reach. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. You can see part of the picture, but never the whole thing. Even access to the Vatican's archives, though slightly more open today than in the past, is still highly restricted. Only selected scholars are allowed in, and even they cannot access everything. There are entire sections that remain completely off-limits. Why? That question continues to fuel curiosity around the world. Some believe it's simply about preservation, protecting fragile historical documents. Others believe it's about control, managing narratives, avoiding controversy, maintaining authority. And then there are those who believe the truth is far more complicated. Because over the past century the Vatican has faced increasing pressure from the outside world. Journalists, researchers, and even insiders have called for more transparency. And in response, there have been moments where the institution has acknowledged mistakes, addressed controversies, and promised reform. But for many, those steps feel incomplete. Like seeing the surface, but never the depth. And that's where the mystery continues to grow. Because every time a question is partially answered, it often leads to even more questions. What hasn't been revealed yet? What stories remain locked away? And perhaps more importantly, who decides when, or if, they should ever be revealed? The idea of hidden history isn't unique to the Vatican. Many powerful institutions throughout time have controlled information. But what makes the Vatican different is its longevity. Over 2,000 years of continuous influence. That's not just history, that's layers upon layers of decisions, actions, and consequences, all built on top of each other. And somewhere within those layers, there are bound to be truths that don't fit the official narrative. Not necessarily because they are shocking, but because they are inconvenient. And history has shown us something very important. Inconvenient truths are often the ones that get buried the deepest. But no secret stays hidden forever. Over time, fragments begin to surface. A document here. A testimony there. A pattern that starts to form. And slowly, the picture becomes clearer. Not complete, but clearer. Which brings us back to the present. Today, the world is more connected than ever. Information spreads faster than it ever has in history. Secrets are harder to keep. Questions are louder. And institutions, no matter how powerful, are being watched more closely than ever before. The Vatican is no exception. Every decision, every statement, every action is analyzed, discussed, and debated on a global scale. And yet, even in this age of information, some doors remain closed. Some archives remain sealed. Some truths remain just out of reach. Maybe they always will. Or maybe, one day, something will change. Because history has a way of revealing itself when the time is right. And when it does, the real story is often far more complex than anyone expected. Not just a tale of secrets and silence, but a reflection of power, humanity, and the choices made behind closed doors. And perhaps that's the most important thing to understand. This isn't just about the Vatican. It's about how power works, how history is written, and how, sometimes, the truth isn't hidden because it's impossible to find, but because it was never meant to be easy. By now, you've probably realized something important. The story of the Vatican isn't built on one single secret. It's built on layers, centuries of decisions, silence, influence, and carefully controlled narratives. And the deeper those layers go, the harder it becomes to separate truth from interpretation. Because history, especially when controlled by powerful institutions, is rarely simple. It's shaped, refined, sometimes even rewritten, not always through falsehoods, but through omission, through emphasis, through perspective. And when you control the records, you control the memory. That's what makes the idea of hidden archives so powerful. Not just because of what might be inside them, but because of what they represent. Access, or the lack of it. Think about how much of what we know about the past comes from documents, records, writings preserved over time. Now imagine if some of those records were never released, or only partially revealed, or interpreted in a specific way before being shared with the world. How different would our understanding be? That's the question that continues to pull people deeper into this mystery. Over the years, there have been moments, small cracks in the wall, where glimpses of deeper truths seemed possible. Historians gaining limited access. Previously sealed documents being opened decades later. Reports emerging that challenge long-held beliefs. But each time, those moments feel controlled. Measured. Never enough to fully expose everything, just enough to acknowledge that there's more beneath the surface. And maybe that's intentional. Because complete transparency doesn't just reveal truth. It also removes control. And control has always been central to power. Not just in the Vatican, but in every major institution throughout history. Control of information. Control of narrative. Control of what people believe to be true. But here's where things start to shift. Because we no longer live in a world where information can be contained the way it once was. The rise of digital communication, independent journalism, and global connectivity has changed everything. Today, a single document, a single testimony, a single leak can spread across the world in minutes. And that changes the balance. It creates pressure. Pressure to explain. Pressure to respond. Pressure to adapt. In recent decades, the Vatican has taken steps, small but noticeable, toward greater openness. Certain archives have been made accessible earlier than expected. Some historical decisions have been re-examined. Some controversies have been publicly addressed. But even then, it feels like we're only seeing part of the picture. Because for every answer that surfaces, new questions emerge. Questions about what hasn't been released yet. Questions about which narratives were shaped by the context of their time. Questions about how much of history is still waiting, somewhere behind those walls. And maybe the most unsettling part of all of this isn't the idea that secrets exist. It's the realization that they might be far more ordinary than we imagine. Not dramatic conspiracies. Not unbelievable events. But human decisions. Mistakes. Compromises. Moments where power was protected instead of challenged. Because those kinds of truths don't just change how we see the past. They change how we see institutions in the present. They remind us that even the most powerful organizations are still made up of people. And people are complex, capable of both great integrity and serious failure. And when those failures happen within an institution built on moral authority, the impact is even greater. Which is why the conversation around the Vatican continues to evolve. It's no longer just about uncovering secrets. It's about understanding accountability, understanding how institutions respond when challenged, understanding whether transparency is truly possible, or if it will always be limited by the need to maintain structure and authority. And as the world continues to change, that question becomes more important than ever. Because the future of any institution, no matter how ancient, depends on how it handles truth. Not just the truth that is comfortable, but the truth that is difficult. The truth that forces reflection. The truth that demands change. So maybe the real darkest secret isn't hidden in a document or locked inside an archive. Maybe it's something much simpler. The constant tension between truth and control. Between what is known and what is allowed to be known. And that tension doesn't just exist in one place. It exists everywhere power exists. Which means this story doesn't end here. It never really ends. Because as long as there are questions left unanswered, as long as there are records left unseen, as long as there are decisions made behind closed doors, the search for truth continues. And maybe one day, more doors will open. More documents will be revealed. More of the story will come into focus. But until then, what remains hidden will continue to shape what we believe. And what we believe will continue to shape the world. And maybe that's where everything truly comes together. Because after exploring centuries of history, influence, secrecy, and unanswered questions surrounding the Vatican, you start to see a pattern. Not a clear answer. Not a single hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. But a pattern of how power behaves when it is sustained over generations. Power protects itself. Power adapts. And most importantly, power decides what is remembered. Think about it. Every major institution that has lasted for centuries has faced moments that could have defined or destroyed it. Moments where the truth, if fully revealed at the time, might have changed everything. But survival often depends on control. Control of timing. Control of information. Control of narrative. And when those controls are maintained long enough, they don't just shape history. They become history. That's why the idea of hidden secrets is so compelling. Because it suggests that somewhere, behind all the layers, there is a final truth waiting to be discovered. But reality is rarely that simple. There isn't just one secret. There are thousands of decisions, thousands of moments, each one adding another layer to the story. Some were necessary. Some were strategic. And some were probably mistakes. But once those moments are buried beneath time, authority, and tradition, they become incredibly difficult to revisit. Not because they are impossible to find, but because uncovering them would require more than just access. It would require willingness. Willingness to question. Willingness to acknowledge. Willingness to change. And that's where the real challenge begins. Because for any institution, especially one as old and influential as the Vatican, change is never simple. It affects not just the present, but the entire foundation it stands on. Every revealed truth has consequences. Every uncovered detail reshapes perception. And perception is everything. That's why even today, in a world driven by information, there are still boundaries, still limitations, still doors that remain closed. Not necessarily because what's behind them is shocking beyond imagination, but because once opened, they can't be closed again. And that permanence is powerful. Because once people see something for what it truly is, they can never completely unsee it. Which brings us back to you, the viewer, the one asking the questions, the one searching for answers in a story that may never be fully told. Because in the end, this isn't just about the Vatican. It's about curiosity. It's about the human need to understand what lies beyond the surface. To question what we're told. To look deeper than what is presented. And to recognize that truth is often more complex than it appears. Sometimes, the answers are out there, waiting to be discovered. Other times, they're hidden so well that all we're left with are fragments, clues, and interpretations. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the search itself is what matters. Because the moment people stop asking questions, that's when silence becomes permanent. So keep asking. Keep exploring. Keep looking beyond the surface. Because history is not just something that happened in the past. It's something that is still being shaped right now. And somewhere, behind closed doors, new decisions are being made. New records are being written. New layers are being added to a story that is far from over. A story that, centuries from now, people will still be trying to understand. Just like we are today. And maybe, one day, more of those doors will open. But until then, the mystery remains. And just when you think you've reached the end of this story, you realize something unsettling. Maybe this isn't the end at all. Because the story surrounding the Vatican was never meant to have a clean conclusion. It doesn't wrap up neatly. It doesn't give you a final answer. Instead, it leaves you with something else. A feeling. A quiet awareness that what we see on the surface is only a fraction of what truly exists beneath it. Because every archive that remains closed suggests there is still something left to uncover. Every document that hasn't been released suggests there is still something left to understand. And every question that remains unanswered keeps the mystery alive. But here's where it gets even more interesting. What if the real power of secrecy isn't just in hiding information, but in controlling curiosity? Think about it. The less people know, the more they speculate. The more they speculate, the further they drift from what might actually be true. And in that space, between fact and imagination, control becomes even stronger. Because now, the narrative isn't just managed by those in power. It's scattered across countless theories, assumptions, and interpretations. Some close to the truth. Some far from it. But all of them pulling attention in different directions. And when attention is divided, clarity becomes harder to reach. So the mystery sustains itself. Not just because things are hidden, but because the search itself becomes endless. And maybe that's the most powerful system of all. Not complete silence. Not full transparency. But something in between. Just enough information to keep the world watching. But never enough to fully understand. And as long as that balance exists, the story continues. New generations will come across the same questions. The same curiosity. The same sense that there is something more beneath the surface. And they'll start searching too. Looking through history. Analyzing fragments. Trying to connect dots that were never meant to be easily connected. And in doing so, they become part of the story themselves. Because every person who questions, who explores, who looks deeper, adds another layer to this ongoing mystery. So now the question isn't just about the past. It's about the future. What will be revealed in the next 10 years? What will remain hidden for another 100? And what truths, if uncovered, could completely change the way we understand everything that came before? No one knows for sure. And maybe that uncertainty is exactly what keeps this story alive. Because certainty ends curiosity. But mystery keeps it burning. So as this video comes to a close, you're left with something more valuable than answers. You're left with awareness. The awareness that history is not always complete. That truth is not always fully visible. And that sometimes, the most important stories are the ones still waiting to be uncovered. And before you leave, ask yourself this. If even a small part of what remains hidden was suddenly revealed, would it change how you see the world? Or would it simply confirm what you've always suspected? Because that answer might be closer than you think.